Good afternoon. This is truly overwhelming. I actually didn't think how it would feel, but now I do. It feels very special. In this room are friends who have come from all over the country. My first boss, whom I met several days after I began working here in 1966. I welcome him, Ken Sutherland. Here in this room is my second boss, who came here to be with me and allow me to tell him how much his mentorship meant to me and how much this mentorship gave me the courage to aim high. And this is David Bishop, and I thank him for being here. My other mentored boss, Martin Runkle, cannot be here today. His health doesn't allow that, and we miss him very much. There are colleagues from around the country. Diana Markham, which I thank her for being here, and clearly my friend Sarah Thomas, who we'll hear in a minute from, and many others. There is Sam Suter, who is here from Washington, and I apologize if I have missed other colleagues. It is quite wonderful. There is staff here. There are the members of the Library's Visiting Committee, the Library Society, Friends of the Library, and others. So I thank you very much for being here. And also with me very specially are my two grandsons, Charlie and Danny. And I welcome them very much. I hope that they will enjoy hearing about librarianship as much as, you never know, that's a chance taking. But that's okay, it's time for them to learn. This is the inaugural lecture in the Judith Nadler Vision Lecture Series. This series was established by the Visiting Committee to the Library and generously supported by Provost Thomas Rosenbaum. This endowed fund was awarded in, and I quote, "in special recognition of the outstanding vision and leadership that Judith Nadler provides to the University of Chicago, and in gratitude for her extraordinary ingenuity, managing, existing, and creating new libraries." In turn, I have dedicated this fund to programs that will inform strategic directions and help guide the vision for the library now and into the future. I cannot think of a speaker more fitting to deliver the inaugural lecture in a series supported by a Vision Fund. And I cannot think of a greater gift to me personally in recognition of my achievements at the University of Chicago Library than a series inaugurated by Sarah. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Sarah Thomas, Vice President for the Harvard Library, who will engage us in the topic, Future-Proofing the Research Library. Sarah Thomas joined Harvard as Vice President for the Harvard Library in August 2013. She previously served as Bodlei's librarian and director of the Bodleian Libraries and served as Pro-Vice Chancellor and member of the Faculty of Modern Languages at the University of Oxford. Previous to Oxford, she was the Carl A. Kroc University Librarian at Cornell and also held posts at the Library of Congress, the National Agricultural Library, the research libraries groups at Stanford University, and Harvard's Widener Library. A prolific author and well-known speaker, some of her recent and upcoming presentations include ebooks, Horseless Carriages and the Future of Libraries at the Royal Danish Library, a conversation with Hilary Mantel at the Times Oxford Literary Festival, National Library Perspectives on the Past, Present, and Future of the Book at the Library of Congress, and the Bodleian, England's first national library, evolves in the 21st century at the Ex Libris National Library meeting. Not mentioned above, but of special meaning to me are my personal friendship with Sarah and my great respect for her intellectual energy and visionary leadership. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Thomas.
Thank you very, very much. It's wonderful to be here. the occasion of Judy's departure, which is quite sad, but it's a splendid opportunity to think about libraries and their future. And I'm really deeply honored to be invited to commemorate Judy's illustrious career on this special day and to speak about the future of libraries. But first, one has to ask, can there be a future without Judy? Right? It will definitely lack a certain pizzazz without her penetrating, and I think sometimes tart comments and observations, something that I've grown to be quite fond of as we come together. The Ivies plus librarians, so that's the Ivy League plus Chicago, MIT, Stanford, MIT, oh, I said MIT, come together. And we were meeting at Princeton in January. And you were marooned here. You weren't able to meet with us in Princeton. So Judy, because of the weather. Right. And so Judy was there on the speakerphone with great perseverance. And you know how hard it is actually to participate in a meeting. And out would pop from the phone these very trenchant remarks. And I thought, Judy is really being liberated now that she's retiring. She's not holding back at all. So I think we need to look forward to her retirement because who knows what's going to come after that. Well, what is our future going to look like in libraries? This sheet music piece dates from 1914, so it's 100 years ago, and it was picturing what they thought the world would be looking like in 2014. So you have that flying boat, which is anticipating, I guess, the jumbo jet. And the chorus, I commend you to look at it on the internet. The whole score is published. The chorus ponders, what's going to be the speed 100 years from now? The girlies are going at a pace that turns locks from gold to gray. We're living a life of constant alteration. There's no solution. It's constant evolution. And the lyricist wonders about the future of the tango and how much girls are going to wear. So, yeah. So that was. I thought that was an interesting beginning for us. And actually, I also loved the very last page of the score, which was advertising for other songs from this publisher, and it included. Now, you have to remember, 1914, wartime, right? Dreams of Mother, In My Canoe, which was described as a great novelty song with funny punchlines, Everybody Loves a Chicken, and Al Jolson's big success, Thanks for the Lobster. And I had to look that, you know, the wonders of the internet is, I was thinking, oh, thanks for the lobster. Is that like to the tune of thanks for the memories? But actually it's not. It's a ragtime song. And there's some fellow who's devoted himself to capturing these old-time songs and recording them, having the recordings made available on the internet. So it was quite interesting. Well, also a century ago, the building in which I now have my office, Harvard's Widener Library, was just being constructed, an imposing edifice which serves as a memorial to Harry Elkins Widener, who perished on the Titanic. And it's part of a genre of massive libraries built in an imposing and impressive style. So you think of the New York Public Library. This is Widener today. We have trees. The New York Public Library or the Library of Congress, they reflected physically that sentiment inscribed over the entrance to my hometown library, which was a littler version of that thing, which was knowledge is power. They have enormous space for collections, and immense catalogs housed within them were keys to unlocking the vault of knowledge and the pathway to power. Now, I first grew to know Judy through our cataloging connection. Judy started at Chicago in 1966 and became a formidable force in the world of bibliographic control. The Regenstein Library opened shortly thereafter, and it was one of a series of postmodern libraries, sometimes called brutalist, I think, of which Cornell, where I spent 11 years, is another, and Toronto, where I was speaking earlier this year, is a third. And it seems to me that part of the features of these libraries were that they offered copious storage space and then, very plain features. I actually found them, I found the Cornell Library quite flexible to work in because of that plainness, perhaps. Well, I began at Widener in 1970 filing catalog cards. Now, these young women are from the 50s, but I suggest we didn't look much different in the 60s and the 70s. And you notice it was these young women who were there poring over these books, and it was the young men at Harvard who were consulting the catalogs where we were filing our cards. These were the days before computers were commonplace. The tools of my trade then were a number 4 pencil and a piece of paper called a P-slip. And I had advanced tools, which, so we created these mock catalog cards. They went off to the typing pool, and they were returned to us. And my heavy-duty tools were an X-Acto knife to scrape a single letter off if it were a typo, and an electric eraser if you had a whole phrase you had to delete. So at the Library of Congress, the catalogs in the main reading room were curved. They created this magnificent circle. It was a destination for scholars and the public. Although, I'll just point out, and this foreshadows something I'll say later, no children allowed there, of course, who would be enthralled by documents there. The Library of Congress published the National Union Catalog. There's another slide of the Library of Congress so you can see it in its full grandeur. National Union Catalog, bringing together it was really our Bible, and it brought together in printed forms works cataloged across our nation. The NUC, I learned from a blog at the Library of Congress, cost $34 million to produce. About the time that this photograph of Judy was taken, it's amazing what you can find on the internet these days. Computers were entering catalog departments, and we began automating our manual processes, first by duplicating what we had done manually. And at Harvard, where I was working, we were treating OCLC's mainframe computers as if they were some sort of giant electronic typewriter. Over time, we discovered the power of sharing cataloging and resources, and we enhanced our processes. But then, some 20 years later, came the disruptive technology of the internet. And you found this heading from the Chronicle of Higher Education in the photo is from the Christian Science Monitor of the same year, from 2001, the deserted library. And you have this pitiful, this happens to be Kansas, I think, this pitiful young woman in her empty reading room in her bib overalls. As students work online, reading rooms empty out, leading some campuses to add Starbucks. And then, as a librarian, I actually always like it when we hit the front page of the New York Times, that people are paying attention to us. Well, this is from a decade ago. old search engine, the library, tries to fit in a Google world. Of course, libraries aren't the only sacred cows to be dismissed on a path to obsolescence. There's something called the extinction timeline, and I know you won't really be able to read it probably on the screen. I don't know if you've seen it before. I'm going to highlight on the next slide the part that I particularly want to show to you, but you'll notice along the bottom the decades. And the part that I'm going to be showing you is in 2020 or 2020, when, and that's the part that begins sit-down breakfasts, post offices, direct marketing, butchers, free parking, World War I survivors, size 0, libraries, unfenced beaches, and static ads. And so Watson predicted that libraries by 2020 would be extinct. Now, you might feel sad about that, but I do look at some of the other things. You have letter writing back there 10 years ago. Well, actually, 2010, letter writing is becoming extinct. Down below the line, you can't really see, but about 2022, copyright is becoming extinct, suggesting a kind of anarchy in terms of intellectual property. Keys, I like that. Where physical newspapers and Google are, that's 2049. So they're predicting that. And then out there a little bit into the distance, death, because we'll become immortal, because we'll be able to be repaired constantly. But actually not even just repaired, because if you went back to the part that's got death, now which I'm missing, oh, you still can't see it. Oh, but just before death, down below there, is physical pain and ugliness is also going to go away. So I like that too, that we're going to be able to be so improved as a result. So, you can tell I'm one of those people who actually doesn't fear change very much. I think it's an opportunity, and if one can become less ugly and not lose one's keys, well, let's go for it. We have, people have been saying this about universities too. So you have the end of the university as we know it. It says half the colleges and universities will have disappeared in a few decades, but places like Harvard will have millions of students. I'm sure that would be like Harvard and Chicago as well, to do that. So that's, All right, so let's move on to that. I just want to show you a few things that have happened with cataloging, because this is a talk for Judy. Here we have earrings made out of old Dewey Decimal card catalog elements. We have centerpieces made out of card catalog drawers. And the NUC, which costs $34 million to produce, the National Union catalog made into holiday decoration. And I also found on eBay, you can buy your own set for, buy it now, $11,000. So if you want to do that. Well, despite these predictions of doom and gloom, libraries are continuing to evolve and to thrive. More people visit libraries in a year than attend all the sports events in the United States combined. Libraries have embraced the digital and the book as object. Even as digital use skyrockets, colleges and universities continue to invest in library buildings, albeit in new configurations. Libraries are community centers which support interaction across cultures, generations, disciplines, and other domains. They feature visualization walls, maker spaces, where you have your 3D printers and you can actually make things, technology-enabled classrooms that allow teaching using unique objects and special collections, and of course, the now ubiquitous but formerly iniquitous cafe. As collections are managed to reflect known and predicted use, libraries are expanding areas for public use. Outreach and access are higher priorities than in the past, and exhibitions invite the curious to explore collections. So I have a series of images I want to talk to you about very briefly. So one is, this is from 2007, the Newsweek issue. So again, it's this theme, you know, everybody's running around saying, oh, libraries are dying, the book is dying. And really what you're seeing is it's morphing. Books are going digital. Okay, that's the Kindle. Now I picked that out because I came from the Bodleian Library, where the famous declaration was, I promise not to kindle therein any flame or fire, and not to smoke in the library. And I always felt we should have gotten a cut on the Kindle, that we should have had that. And then I'm struck by these ads for the Kindle. This one came from the Sunday New York Times in the book review section in November, where as they're marketing it, they're saying it's just like a library. Well, it's a lot of books, but is it just like a library? And then you find that some guerrilla librarian has come along and again said, why not go to one, folks? And done that. So I should say, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I own a Kindle. I think they have their value, but it's not the same as a library. And we have then these changes in the 21st century. This is a picture of Oxford's storage facility, high-density storage. And this, I was just in here, this magnificent space in the Mansueto Library, the robotic book stack, where what is happening? We're managing our collections differently. We're managing them more efficiently. They've become so voluminous that we're no longer able to have all of them in entirely browsable space. But we're not saying that the book is history. It's very much part of the fabric of our lives. We see in libraries these kinds of transformations and evolutions. So this happens to be in Widener Library, a room was called in my day Widener 191. It was where the cataloger sat. In fact, my desk was over in the corner by that window. It was formerly the treasure room of Harvard's Widener Library, where they had rare books. Then it became a staff room, and now the staff have moved out, and they have moved that back into a newspaper reading room. So part of what we have to remember is libraries aren't static. They are very dynamic, vigorous institutions that will put on new growth in new directions. I was interested when I was going through the Mansueto Library to learn about your hours of service, which are very generous. And this is a picture of Duke, a new library edition that was built there. And one of the things you see, and you see that very strongly with Mansueto as well, the library is like a beacon. It's lit up at night when everyone else is, well, some of the older folks may be sleeping, but the students are there. They're coming into that space. They're enjoying that. It's drawing them. It's signaling to the world. There is activity there. We are creating new knowledge. We are learning. And I think in the case of Duke, you have this same sort of, the integration of the Gothic with the modern, and of course, the cafe, which is sort of the buffer zone between the social and the active learning and the quiet learning. So you see that inside. Also in Carolina, at the Hunt Library at North Carolina State University, here's a visualization wall that has moved in. Libraries are more and more partnering with people who are doing research involving data and integrating that into their spaces. Now here, this is very sad, isn't it? This is one of my former libraries. It's the new Bodleian Library, and it was built in the 30s. And people said, "Well, it looks like a municipal swimming pool, doesn't it?" And the students said, "It looks like a prison-like fortress." And actually, Howard Colvin, who was a distinguished architectural historian, called it, in the Oxford fashion, he called it a dinner jacket in Harris tweed. And you can sort of see that. Well, the brilliance of the architects and Richard Ovenden, who's my successor at Oxford, was that they saw the ability to transform a space in the center of the city and have it become a very lively open space. So they moved the books, or we moved the books 28 miles away. We could do that. Unlike the University of Chicago, where people were going to lose a browsable collection and couldn't tolerate that. In Oxford, the saw was, we may as well drive to Cambridge to get a book. It takes so long to get it from the Bodleian. So we were actually able to put it into a high-density storage and have it be more efficient than it was when it was housed in the bowels of this building. And this is what it's going to be reopening as next March, as it becomes a space for special collections, an inviting public space, a welcoming space, but still not just the iconography of books, but actually the real use of books through special collections, because that's one of the most important things we are doing in libraries as we're changing, as we're moving, is to bring the past forward with us and incorporate it into new ways of learning. So, for example, there's a lot of work being done on adding exhibition space. That's extremely important. I think the next thing that is happening is this example from Bryn Mawr is students are curating the exhibitions. So we're moving from the expert who tells people what they should know to people who are learning actively by doing, with a guide perhaps, but the students are actually producing these exhibitions. It becomes part of their course study, their independent study, and it's able to have that vitality of the collection come alive. And I saw examples where that can be done here in teaching space. I love it when people say they talk about teaching using objects, but really most of those objects are books, right? I mean, in libraries. Sometimes they're real objects. This is, again, from Duke with the Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library. So we're doing a lot more, and again, I see this here with group study. So although there remain the inspirational reading room, which you could see not so inspirational in that picture of the deserted library, but actually when you go into those grand reading rooms, people are still using them and loving them. But now we're more social. The blend is away from solely independent learning to peer-to-peer learning, and with the use of technology. And we're partnering all the time. So we are moving to work with other collaborators, such as learning and teaching facilities or writing centers. As I was preparing for this talk, I happened to be in London, and I went to an exhibition at the Royal Academy that was really the Royal Academy. It's this bastion of tradition in the arts, really those great Beaux-Arts reading galleries, just spectacular. So this was called Sensing Spaces, and I felt like the exhibition was speaking to me about libraries and about this talk. So I had to integrate this in. So when you went into, there's a room that had a big concrete Roman arch in it, and there was a plaque on the wall, but they said, according to the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, What is important is what is contained, not the container. And I thought, well, this is what we're always talking about now with books and digital. Is it the book that matters, or is it the content that matters? And I thought that was really interesting that was what architects were talking about. It's a cultural phenomenon to be rethinking this. And then in the next room, you see these straws. They're about 1 meter high, and and they're a little witty. And you run into, each visitor to the museum was invited to take a straw and use it to create something. And so they were creating this tunnel. Again, it's all about, libraries today become more about interactivity and about making things. And that's what they were testing in this museum space. And then the next room I went into had these wonderful turrets, and they were connected. You could go up inside one and across into another. But what really got me was, on these boxes, seated right next to it, were these little Spanish toddlers, and they were eating in the museum. And I thought, okay, no children were allowed in the Library of Congress. Food, definitely not allowed. So we're breaking rules is one of the things that we're doing, is we're questioning assumptions. We're looking differently at what we're doing. And I found this very challenging to look at. And then this last thing that seemed also very consistent with what we're talking about in libraries. Architecture is primarily about people asking questions such as, who is the user? What's going to happen here? How can I respond to user needs? And I think that follows us all the time. Now, so now I'm looking forward a little bit to the future-proofing part, which is to say, well, how do we future-proof our institutions? I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to meet a man named Lawrence Wilkinson, who has done scenario planning for a number of large institutions, Disney, for example, but also advises, now he really just takes on people that he finds interesting. So he's worked with publishers, and he volunteered while I was at Oxford to do scenario planning in the library pro bono. And we had this where we looked at what was higher education going to be like in 2025. So the scenario planning allowed us to look at alternative visions of the future and to imagine different futures. And what that was going to do was to have us have we might have strategic plans, but we could adjust very quickly depending on how the scenario unfolded. And we looked at the scenarios across 2 axes. So one was, were we going to become more traditional, more integrated? We can still recognize higher ed, and students want degrees based on institutional tuition and on institutional tuition. And then another was a much more radical view of higher education, where students are getting their credentials in a variety of different settings. And so we were going to be reorganized and emergent. So if you think of all that's happening with MOOCs, for example, are we going to be a place where residential universities are not going to be 4-year institutions catering to 18 to 22-year-olds? Are people going to be learning differently? And then what does that mean for libraries? So as we look at each development in the world, we could cite that along this. And these were very well developed scenarios, and we came up with different ideas of the kinds of services we would develop as a result. The same thing about information and technology. Would it be closed? Would our job be to be the biggest aggregator of information in the world and charge people out the wazoo for it? Or would technology and content become very open, in which case our role as becoming subscription negotiators, would that go away? And so then what would our role there be? So that was one of the things that we were looking at. And then just recently, the Association of Research Libraries has been looking at strategic thinking and design. And we've looked at a number of things, which I'm just going to race through here. Looking at 2030, does it say that? 2033, so 20 years from now, basically. And this is what they were looking at. They were looking at coordinated management of collections, so no longer entirely the individual library, but really federated in some way. Scholarly publishing at scale, looking at metrics of scholarly use, about training new leaders, about having this kind of boundless symposium of conversations where we're looking with different partners and being very flexible and loose about what we're doing, becoming a smart library with all sorts of information that's available. And I just want to stop and say for a second, back when I was doing that Kindle image, my son works for something called audible.com, and it's the downloadable books on the internet, and he has the Kindle relationship so that you can listen online or on your iPod, but if you have it on your Kindle, it knows where your place is, that sort of thing. But I'll be going out for a walk with him, and he takes out his iPhone, and he's knowing in real time how many people have subscribed to his service in Audible based on the data that is coming in and being managed. And I'm looking at this, he was 26 then, I'm looking at this 26-year-old kid, he's 27 now, I'm thinking, I should know that about who's coming into my library. I should know that in real time about what sorts of topics people are doing and getting that aggregated. We can do it. We do know how to do it, but we're not really doing it in our libraries. And I think that's going to be one of the big changes for us, is to become far more data-driven as we go along. And the last thing in the ARL stable is the Innovation Lab and staying ahead of the game, and practicing pop-ups, so experimenting a lot. We're not doing things for all time anymore. We're expecting that constant change and evolution. I'm going to just skip that for a second and talk about what I really think we need to do to future-proof the library. And that is, I'm just going to say, the best way to future-proof the library is to have great leadership. We need people with a sense of history. We need people who can avoid the pitfall of discarding something which is precious in an ill-considered or inadvertent way. But we need people with the courage and insight and decisive thinking, nevertheless, to break away from history and to create a pathway from the known to the unknown. We need the flexibility to adapt to new environments, new relationships. We need people with knowledge, both factual and emotional, who are constantly absorbing new information and organizing it into a framework for action. We need people who can connect with other people, stimulate their thinking and development, and join people and ideas for the advancement of knowledge and understanding. And we especially need people with strong values and an ethical code, values such as the sense of stewardship of cultural heritage, as the need for open and democratic access to ideas and information, and as a respect for all who will benefit for librarians in their work. And Judy Nadler is an example of that kind of leadership. She has, over 5 years, evolved and grown conserved things and taken risks, followed, joined, and led. And she leaves a living legacy of achievements, whether it be books cataloged, buildings built, collections made accessible, or policies developed. But I'll warrant that her most precious gift to us is the spirit that she has instilled in those of us around her to do better. And in many ways, through her library leadership, where she's created an environment in which minds can develop into stronger critical thinkers and leaders. We fear not change. We embrace it, as generations of advancing scholars and students have done before. We have exciting years ahead of us as we race to a future that beckons us forward. Libraries will be renewed and will be reinvented, and thanks to outstanding leaders, they will remain vibrant and an indispensable partner in the creation, dissemination, and preservation of knowledge. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, if this is not humbling, what is? Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No.
Thank you. We have time for questions. There will be a mic. Please do speak into the mic because this is being recorded. So, are there questions?
Thank you for this very wonderful talk you've given us. Are there any library programs that you're aware of that you find particularly future-looking and innovating that you could talk about?
You mean sort of iSchool programs, that sort of thing?
No, I think libraries were doing, not library schools.
Well, actually, I was saying to Judy at lunch today that I feel a bit like Rip Van Winkle, because I've been in the UK for 7 years and have come back, and I find myself not as au courant as I might be about my colleagues. I am still learning. So I'm not going to actually at this time say, but I have several colleagues who are here who might have suggestions. Go.
In years past, in years past,
This is Paula Duffin. I can't believe that she's here.
Yes, of course, Paula.
Sorry to do that.
University of Chicago Press, Smith College, my alma mater, and Paula's.
Greetings. In years past, the 125 or so major research libraries competed for graduate students and scholars, often based on their resources, their library resources. To what extent is this going to be a thing of the past, given the ability to access fabulous collections online?
Yeah, so I mean that's a very interesting question, and I think it is the sort of thing where one has to ask oneself: does an institution need to compete on its library the way it competes with its football team, which is notably missing here, right? But I think where we're competitive in institutions will be on the basis of our people. It'll be on the basis of what we're doing with collections. So I think it's quite interesting, actually. It becomes away from just sort of mastery of facts or having the most information to how do you use it? How do you mine it? How do you connect people with it? And so there's that element. But the question again would become, still, do we need to compete on that? Won't it be better for society if we can advance knowledge and advance understanding and create a better civilization if we raise all people up higher? And we might still be competitive people. We probably don't end up at institutions like Chicago if we're not, right? But I think that there's plenty of room to collaborate and still to distinguish oneself in some way. And now I'm thinking back to your question. Wait, are you there still? Yes. So I would be remiss, actually, if I didn't mention an institution that I've had a long-standing connection with, and that's Cornell, where I think there are lots and lots of wonderful examples of innovative programs there, but particularly the one that has been developed by my successor, Ann Kenny, in collaboration with Jim Neal at Columbia, called Too Cool, C-U-L, like Cornell University Library and Columbia University Library. It could be 3 cool, right? Wouldn't be too cool then, right? But where they're working together to share certain aspects of their infrastructure. For example, having a common library system. So instead of having 2 separate library systems, one can have a more efficient operation, a less costly operation if you're combining to work on it. Or sharing I think a South Asian bibliographer, for example, or other types of arrangements that they have. And I think that's very much something that we will see more of in the future, is collaboration across institutions in that way.
Hi, I'm Mary Radner. I'm the Document Delivery Services Librarian. And in terms of the topic, future-proofing the library, I have a couple reactions. One is that we're moving into an environment that's more and more electronic. In terms of like ebooks, it's impossible right now for us to interlibrary loan those or share those if we're not in some sort of shared PDA project or something like that. And I was curious about your thoughts on how we could in the future would be able to share those types of resources. And then I was also wondering, the print book has survived so many centuries. How are our electronic things or our born digital things, where formats seem to come and go pretty quick, in this past century, how are those going to endure over time the way the print object has?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Two very different questions, of which I've already forgotten the first one. Give me the key word again. Oh, the ebooks, sharing the ebooks, right, and the copyright question, and the licensing question. I think it's, that's a really tough nut to crack, and I think we will continue to struggle for some time, and then I think the system's going to break apart. And I look at the business section, say, of the paper, whether it's the New York Times or the Financial Times, and I look at what was it Apple that recently bought one of the music streaming companies, and I think we're going to change the model in the way we deliver information. Now, I don't know exactly in what way that will happen, but I don't think that the way we have been developing over the last 10 to 20 years is, where the publishers are trying to lock things down more and more, and then the internet society is kind of anarchistic in a way. There will be something where that will fly apart, and we will remake it in some way that allows, supports the rights of the creator, but also allows us to have new knowledge developed in the way that copyright was originally designed to work. So it'll balance that way. But it's not a very good prediction. I don't know. There are other people here who would know a lot more. Now, the other question about the ebooks and the fact that paper books have endured for centuries, and ebooks seem so evanescent, and all you have to do is find some old bit of technology at home, and you think, oh my gosh, I couldn't look at those photos if I wanted to, or something. But I keep looking at Deanna, And I remember something that Deanna Markham wrote years ago about, we don't save every scrap of paper in the world. And I can actually remember one time when I was at the Library of Congress and I was going through a music process, I think it was a music processing area, where they had all of Irving Berlin's checks. Do you remember that, Deanna? And they were sorting through and they were throwing them out. And the ones that were repetitive or not useful or something. But now you think, well, maybe you could have sold those on eBay for something. Had Irving Berlin's signature on it. And I don't mean to make light of it, but I do think we forget sometimes as we focus on the permanence of certain things we know and love, that actually they too have had their losses. And I also have an enormous faith in, I do have enormous faith in technology, that we will transcend the kind of decay, the bit rot that we experience, and that we will come up with ways to make that material continuing to be accessible. Okay. Oh dear. Now I'm really in trouble.
No, you never are in trouble. Taking us into a different direction, and taking an example from real life, I tend to be a cautious driver. My grandson would say I'm a bad driver. Well,
is that true? Must be some other grandson then.
so anyway, but I'm actually quite mindful of the rearview mirror. So taking this into the context of libraries and being mindful of the rearview mirror, what is it that actually we can take into the future, moving forward, from what we see and what we know so well? Are there some things that are worthwhile being mindful of, to learn from, and are there things that actually should totally be left behind?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely, it's the values that we have, it's the principles. But actually, I'd like to do this somewhat more interactively.
Is our understanding of what people are now using, how they are doing their scholarship, and making sure that we have the tools and resources in place so that they can continue that. And I always, when I think about a library, I always remember that the things that are in it were chosen by people, and people who knew something about those collections. And that's a very important value to take into the future, I think. Not just a random assortment of information, but thoughtfully curated collections that allow scholars to continue to be productive.
And I guess I would add to that much of what we have got to do.
This doesn't work.
Can you hear it over there?
Right up here? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So much of what we have to focus on is assisting people in using this information. We focus so much on the information, but increasingly that's becoming a more universal thing, and the differences will be how well we are able to assist people and educate people in how you actually get at it.
So the human intervention.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anybody else want to weigh in on something?
There are librarians.
There's one. Yeah.
What we need to preserve, privacy of the users. And this is a great threat, I think, when you start talking about the larger and greater use of data.
Yeah, actually, I think that is a very interesting point, this balance between privacy. So, for example, I'm struck by that case in Spain where the man has had information deleted from the Google search indexes because he wants his privacy respected. On the other hand, would we have allowed him to come in and rip that news page out of the newspaper in the library? You know, so what is the difference between having it printed and defending the integrity of something like that, and then it's the magnification that occurs, and it's also perhaps the well, I was going to say it's the complicity that whether one has agreed or not to have that done. But you know, there I've gotten that. That's on the internet. And the other one was in the library archives put online. Yeah. So yeah, but these are important issues for our times and for the future. Is what do we do with that data? When I'm using the internet and I get those wretched ads about reducing your weight, it's very, I'm thinking, go away, I don't want to see them. But once in a while, there might be one about gardening that I actually find helpful to do. So how do we balance that? And if you were a scholar, maybe you would like to know that there was someone even in the next room who was working on a topic that you might find of interest. No?
Right.
Okay. Probably.
What else is it that we wouldn't want to give up? Or what is it that we would love to give up?
Yes, I think the quiet reading space surrounded by books, even if you're not actively using those books, it's a haven. And I would hate to see that haven disappear.
Yes, could you hear that? That was the speaking on behalf of the quiet, inspirational reading space, and that is a haven. I think that is very much for us something that is really valuable. One of the things that we're seeing in our libraries, and you see it in great evidence here, is choice. It seems to be, we have become as a society so enamored of choice. So you go into the supermarket and there are 100 brands of crackers or something like that, and you have your particular choice for your particular moment. In libraries, we have these choices and people often say at libraries where I've been, where there are many different types of libraries, sometimes they feel like being in a modern library, sometimes they feel like being in an old library. So we want to preserve for people that sense of diversity, that sense of choice, of which the iconic reading room is definitely an important part.
Me again. I think one thing that we need to be sure to preserve and move into the future is the people who become librarians and the personal services. People will say, well, Google can get me information on anything. I don't need a librarian to pick it out for me. But 100,000 hits probably needs a little weeding down. And things like Amazon can do supposedly reader's advisory. But if I buy a kid's book, all of a sudden every ad I'm getting is for children's books, and I only needed one birthday present. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing that not having a central library or not having a recognizable face for the librarian is, that's one place where that kind of interaction is being lost with the online. And maybe too late we'll find out we missed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think along the same lines, preserving teaching people how to do research is one of the essentials of a research library, because it's often lost in the online environment, and the faculty aren't always teaching how to do the best research. And so I think there still needs to be collaboration between the library staff and the faculty as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, very, very, very good point. Yeah, no, I totally agree that it's even more. I mean, I think when you were talking about the the sort of uncurated mass on the internet. I think of it's like a flea market. You know, you can, if you have the time, you can find all these wonderful things, but sometimes it's really helpful to go into a curated place, like a library, like a fine antique store, and just get the particular clock you were looking for, you know, if you were doing that, and then having that assistance from the knowledgeable person. So I think it's I feel like we've been kind of burdened, you know, if you think of us coming out of cataloging, you know, the sheer weight of all the books that come in and kind of doing them, we were sort of cataloging them one by one. And if we're able to move to be more efficient in some of those processes, we liberate people and the resources to support people to collaborate and partner with people in the academic enterprise, whether it's getting helping on when people are putting in for research grants, and we have the knowledge of different sources or work that's been done, or whether it's teaching people how to use information resources.
And it's exactly that intervention, that human intervention, that I consider so important. People want more information. There is this sense that there is not enough. Actually, there is a lot. And there may be even too much. And screening and getting the best out of it is important. Librarians were selectors. They teased out the best. They assessed what is important, and that is what they purchased years ago. Today, there is this intermediary is not always there. And that, I believe, is going to be a very long-lasting role for librarians, to be the intermediary with, you know, between information and those who need it.
Right. You've probably said it best. I think we should thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Well, thank you very, very much for being here. And thank you, Sarah, for inaugurating a wonderful series. And thank you, everybody who is here, whom I have mentioned and whom I have not. It is a very special day for the library, a special day for me personally, a special day for the future of libraries. And I hope this is going to be a good future. So thank you very much.